Welcome, everybody, to Before the Commit, episode 26. This week, we'll be covering Google Anti-Gravity and ACP, also known as Agent Context Protocol, Client Protocol. In News or Noise, we'll be talking about the new release from NVIDIA, their inference chip, and their secure OpenClaw called NemoClaw. And in the Killam chain, we'll be talking about a command and control interface for hijacked agents. With me, as usual, I have my friend Dustin Hillgardner. Hey, Dustin, how's it going?
Hello.
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw this yesterday. NVIDIA, it makes sense. NVIDIA at their GTC 2026, their whole thing was on inference, for the last, whatever, they've been saying one chip for all of it. Basically you could use the same chip for training, for inference. And I think with all the rising costs of, energy and, just data center costs and, everything, the focus is on inference and now, of course, applications. They have a new chip. It's already been adopted by AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, ByteDance, PayPal, Pinterest, Cursor, Perplexity. All the major infrastructure players are already adopting a chip, which means they probably had it already, and we're kind of keeping it quiet. So the Dynamo chip is inference for OS for data centers. It orchestrates GPU memory resources across a cluster. It boosts GPU inference performance up to 7x, and it's open source. I don't know what that means. Open source in AI is a weird definition. Yeah, it's designed for agentic AI workloads. It routes requests to GPUs that already have relevant short-term memory from earlier steps. This infrastructure is built for agents, not just chatbots. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think it's I think these specialized types of chips are going to become more and more apparent, where chips for doing data processing, inference, training, image generation, video generation, specific chips or specific models that do specific tasks create optimizations, and like those optimizations are going to become more and more important as this stuff gets commoditized.
Yeah, I'm not thoroughly versed on this, but it seems to me that like NVIDIA's earlier statements about one chip for all may have had to pivot because of the fact that there's players that came up like Grok, the GROQ version of Grok, not XAI's Grok. And Cerebras, I think, is the other company, who both came out with really innovative chips. Because instead of building a chip for all, like most chip producers are doing, they started focusing on what if we just built a chip that's optimized for inference. Mm-hmm. And apparently, if you do that, you can get some great results that the one chip for alls weren't able to do at the cost. So,
well, it's
probably what kind of forced NVIDIA to get into that market.
What's interesting is that NVIDIA bought Grok in December for $20 billion. So I wonder if they just took the chips and said, hey, we have inference chips now.
I didn't know that, but it makes sense.
Yeah, so that's how they already adopted it. It's kind of just like a, rather than compete with them, they just acqui-hired them or, acquired their IP. And they
otherwise that would have been a really quick turnaround.
And the NVIDIA logo got slapped on it. AWS is adopting our chips already.
What they vibe coded a competitor, but they bought it. So that makes a lot more sense. I thought they had just turned it around very quickly.
No. Maybe there is some of that there. They have great engineers and great tech and access to unlimited amounts of hardware, essentially. But yeah, I suspect that it's related to the the acquisition. I mean, from December till now, like like a likely way to just create a bunch of slide decks that talk about your inference chips. That's really just an acquired you know, piece of R&D or, you know, whatever.
Yeah, they make a lot of sense. I mean, over time, I mean, it kind of makes sense that there was one chip for all, because before there was really a lot of inference going on, there was a lot of training going on first.
Yeah.
But now there's probably far more inference than there is training. So it makes sense to have a specialized chip.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, NVIDIA's Q4 revenue was $68 billion, which is the percentage of that from data centers alone is around 90%. So when you think about, they are essentially, you know, owning, or, you know, I don't know the percentage of what they own, but essentially the training gold rush is now shifting to inference. Um, but an interesting sort of side note is the tariffs related to the chips exported out of the U.S. after import. Um, so yeah, essentially, a supply chain infrastructure is now a geopolitical weapon, which makes sense also, just given um, you know, the ability to kind of do other things as it relates to AI, whether it be like to like enable weapon systems, or, you know, whatever other things the defense industrial base is able to do with the chips, or the, sorry, not the chips, with the underlying result of having the technology to be able to use AI. It makes a lot of sense why you would constrain, you would try to constrain or tax it.
Have they talked about the export controls on inference trips? I mean, I imagine, is there going to be any export controls on inference trips? Because I thought that we don't mind anyone having the best inference. All we care about is guarding the training chips, right?
I don't know. I don't know if the tariff is across the board or not. It just says
Yeah.
AI chips in general.
Well, the tariff, I guess, is a completely separate issue. That might apply in either way. But I think that like NVIDIA is
Oh, export
actually,
controls.
yeah,
I
like
don't
they
know.
can export like their latest training model, their latest training chips, period.
Potentially, I think when it comes to export controls, like you always have that as part of like any um like at least in the US, like if you build something that's specific to a customer here, especially in military use cases, like if you look at um the um the stuff around munitions, for example, like if a prime contractor builds something for you, you can basically, as part of your agreement, have export controls applied to it, because there's some specific technology that you don't want to be there. So whether or not there's an across the board thing, I don't know. I would have to research it.
I know that the administration's, I guess, AI slash crypto czar, David Sachs, um, his strategy has been to allow NVIDIA to export to China the chips that are like one generation ahead of their own homegrown chips,
Mhm.
but not the latest that we have. And
Yeah.
I guess the strategy around that is that if you just restrict them entirely, then it sort of incentivizes China to grow their own chip industry. Whereas if um, you keep them supplied with a chip that's one generation ahead of their own chips, then it kind of puts the pressure on their own chip companies can't sell as well as NVIDIA is selling because they don't have something as good. So it kind of like dampers their own industry because they're not, the best thing on the block selling to everybody. NVIDIA still is. But at the same time, they don't have the training chips that they have in the US, which then slows them down on training. So it's kind of like this thread the needle strategy, which it'll be interesting to see how it applies to inference chips, if at all. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's part of the reason why NVIDIA is interested in them as well, is because they can probably export them much easier.
Yeah, they do control. There is some controls around case by case basis release of certain chips. So it is somewhat regulated, but I don't know. I have the full picture.
Yeah.
So this week, I guess we're talking about ACP and anti-gravity. So what did you learn?
Yeah, so I guess I'll talk about ACP first because it's probably shorter. So ACP is what is it? Agent Client Protocol. I was having to look at my notes because otherwise I'll make the same mistake. I'll call it agent context because I have context on the head all the time. But it's an open protocol. You can think of it as like the middle layer between the IDE and the coding agent itself. So you might have like Codex or Claude Code or you name it, like Goose. There's a whole bunch of Codex, etc. A lot of coding agents, or whatever you might want to call them, AI agents that do code. And they were all kind of, a lot of them were forking VS Code and building themselves into VS Code. Some of them were CLIs, like terminal apps. Some of them had completely developed their own IDE. And everywhere in between, they were basically building in a number of different ways, and they still are. But the ones that were integrating with VS Code or integrating with JetBrains or etc., they were having to do a lot of low-level stuff, like kind of building their own bespoke adapter for the IDE, so that the agent can actually do things like open up files in a tab inside the UI of the IDE, make changes, manipulate the IDE in all the ways you can imagine. And because of this, two companies kind of started to build their own sort of adapter layer, their own protocol for how that communication would take place, similar to like how MCP is the protocol adapter that allows you to get at tools. That was standardized. One was JetBrains and the other one was Zed Industries. And they both, around the same time, announced that they were going to be, putting out their protocol. And once they realized that they'd be competitors of each other, they, surprisingly, actually, they sat down in the same room and decided to consolidate and build just sort of an open standard around both of their ideas. And so they did that. They launched it in January, late January, 2026. So very recently. And that's what ACP is. So it's similar to how it's the same theory behind like LSP. So before AI, you had all these IDEs, but they all have to understand like the languages so that they can like highlight the text and they can have like click through to the definition and all the other stuff that comes with having a deep understanding of the languages, as opposed to like what we had a generation before that, which was just kind of like a glorified notepad. So, those of us old enough will remember when you got the ability to, like IntelliSense and, like you can right click on a function call and jump to the definition of the function and all the other stuff, highlighting and everything like that. The way that was done in sort of a well-architected way was there's these things called language servers that have all of the metadata and information about various languages. So there's like a language server for JavaScript, a language server for C# or whatever else is out there. And the IDEs themselves integrate with the language server. And they integrate with the language server through this thing called LSP. I think it was like language server protocol or something like that. And that was all run over JSON RPC. And essentially ACP is the exact same thing. Instead of feeding the IDE or interfacing with the IDE for the purposes of telling the IDE about the language involved, this is about integrating the coding agent with the IDE. And so it's also done under JSON RPC. And just like I said, just recently was launched. There's a number of editors that support ACP. So there's, of course, Zed and JetBrains, who were the original creators of ACP. NeoVim. I'm pretty sure VS Code has a plugin. It's not native out of the box, but you can do it with a plugin. So it's pretty much being picked up by all the different IDEs out there. And then as far as the agents themselves that support it, it's pretty much everyone at this point. Funny enough, I think the only one who doesn't or the only major one that doesn't, but is soon going to, is anti-gravity from Google. But it makes sense because anti-gravity is pretty new. So Claude Code, sorry?
So what's the benefit of having this like layer of abstraction?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of benefits. I mean, first of all, it allows, just like when the coding agents started integrating with LSP, it gave them a deeper understanding of the languages behind the scenes, and they could traverse the the definitions. They could get at the code at a much better way than they were before, which is just kind of grepping through it and stuff. ACP gives them a deeper integration with the IDE itself, and it also makes them kind of agnostic of the IDE. So now, instead of it being like, oh yeah, I'm built into VS Code, or oh yeah, I work with VS Code or JetBrains, but not any of the others yet, but we're going to have support in the future. Now, by supporting ACP, they basically hit every single IDE that has ACP integration, which, like I said, is nearly all of them. So it's an adapter that gives you, an integration point that you can integrate with, and you get a lot of other integrations for free in terms of the IDEs.
Does that mean that like there's no moat around your like IDE? Like, is there, like, if I can plug in Claude Code to any other ACP enabled thing, does that mean that there's no like VS Code now works the same? Like, yeah, I'm trying to understand, like, are these now swappable parts, like, essentially?
Yeah, so the IDEs are basically swappable, and the agents are swappable from the IDE's perspective. So that means, Claude Code, Codex, Gemini, CLI, Goose, Augment Code, Open Code, Cursor, you name it, and there's more. They all support, those coding agents support ACP. So they would actually be able to manipulate, JetBrains IDs like IntelliJ or PyCharm or WebStorm, or VS Code if it had that plugin installed theoretically.
Does that mean you can use Claude Code with Grok Code Fast now with ACP?
What's that?
Does that mean that you could use Grok Code Fast with Claude Code using ACP?
No, because it doesn't have anything to do with the provider to the coding agent. It's not about the provider at all. So you can
I
kind of
see.
think of it as the coding agent is a middleman between the IDE and the provider. ACP is about the line. So if you think of there being three boxes, the top box is the IDE, the middle box is like Claude Code, and then the bottom box is the provider. And there's lines attaching each one to Claude Code as the middleman. ACP is in the line between Claude Code and the IDE. It's the adapter there.
I got you.
So it's all about making sure that Claude Code and the IDE interact with each other in a standardized fashion, as opposed to like, Claude Code doing some sort of like weird bespoke way of attaching itself to the IDE itself. And so it doesn't have anything to do with how the coding agent itself uses the provider or which providers they use. But yeah, that's what ACP is. It's pretty interesting. It means that any IDE that's created in the future that adopts itself to ACP would work hypothetically out of the box with any of the other coding agents.
So it's really about how the IDE or kind of interface for development communicates with the agent itself.
Yeah, and if you're a startup out there making your own coding agent, you would probably adopt ACP from the beginning, because that's what would mean that you don't really have to get into like the interaction with the IDE. Like you can just ride atop the standard interface.
Interesting.
Yeah.
OpenClaw actually allows you to use ACP, but I don't fully understand why. I guess because it can talk to agents and do stuff with it. I don't fully get it.
Well, it's a good question. I wonder if there's other uses for the protocol outside of what its original intent was. But also it might be about, I think if you don't hook up Claude Code to OpenClaw, it uses like Pi coding agent or something like that. Maybe it has something to do with that. Maybe that Pi coding agent can be attached to an IDE, and then hypothetically you could see it coding or something. But I'll have to look into that a little bit deeper and find out why.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else on ACP?
Not really.
What about the agent registry?
Agent registry.
ACP agent registry.
Oh, yeah. So it's kind of like their their marketplace that attaches, gives you which agents are compatible with JetBrains and Zed. So I guess it would be kind of like if you have JetBrains. It's kind of a foreign thing for me because I got Claude Code and then I started using it, or I get Anti-Gravity or Codex or etc. I start using it, and then the IDE is kind of a second thought. Probably I'm going to try to use VS Code or something like that. But you could imagine if you're using JetBrains on a daily basis, now all of a sudden there's this marketplace that would basically say, hey, by the way, did you know you could use this with Claude Code? You could use it with Codex, and there's probably like a click type setup that would help you get started really quick in one of those directions.
Yeah, on the ACP website, it lists all the, I guess, the adopters of the protocol in their ACP registry. So it has like Pi ACP, Kilo, Kimi, Gemini, GitHub Copilot, so on and so forth, Cursor. So,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah, pretty cool. So anti-gravity.
So tool calls are also part of it, I'm assuming, because I see stuff about tool calling.
Yeah, but I think the tool calls that they're talking about are like the IDE as a tool, because remember, it's treating the IDE like a set of tools, like opening a file or loading this into the workspace or doing X, Y, or Z. Like they can open tabs up in VS Code, for instance. So I believe those are the tools they're talking about. When you're talking about like MCP tools, that's still, like I said, on the coding agent it's from the coding agent outwards as opposed to the IDE itself. But I'll have to look into it a little bit deeper. Maybe there's some interaction that the IDE has with tool calls. Like, for instance, a good example would be the IDE might have a special type of UI element it uses for tool calls, right? So maybe there's like some interaction with that as well, so that when the provider or when the coding agent is using tools, maybe it shows up in the IDE in a special way. But I'll have to dig into that a little bit deeper, because my only understanding is that the IDE itself is used as a tool. The coding agent itself sees the IDE as a set of tools, kind of similar to it being a special type of MCP server.
Yeah, there's a bunch of interesting stuff in here, like the plan, agent plan. I mean, I guess more slash commands, like. So I'm assuming that all of that stuff is extended out from like something like Claude, where they're making it extensible so that you can hook into like an IDE and not use Claude code directly, like through the CLI. Not sure why you would do that, but
yeah. So a good example would be like you see a lot of these coding agents being built into the IDE in an actual UI. Like that was the original reasons why they forked VS Code. Claude Code didn't go that route, but from the beginning. But then there did appear to be some plugins and some things that were added to give you sort of a rich user interface inside of the native IDE. I would imagine that those probably leverage ACP, or if they didn't originally, they probably try to now. So I think that's where some of that comes in.
Gotcha. Okay. How about Google Anti-Gravity?
Yeah. So Anti-Gravity is, I started using it first, and then I started looking into sort of the history of it, and I realized that it appears to be actually Windsurf, because Google bought Windsurf at some point. So I didn't recognize it at first because it's been a long time since I used Windsurf, and but it also looks different than Windsurf. But there's certain elements of it that I can kind of be like, aha, okay, now I understand why some of it is a little bit familiar. So it's kind of built in a different way than the other coding agents. First off, a lot of the other coding agents are kind of terminal first, and then the IDE is something as an afterthought. I think even Codex, I think, is just was built kind of CLI first. And I think the reason why it has an IDE is because it's a VS Code fork, but I think it was kind of CLI first, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong about that. But certainly Open Code, Claude Code, CLI first.
Well, the good news is that we never actually evaluated Windsurf, so I don't feel too bad. It would have been like, it's actually Kilo Code, and we did it.
We started with Kilo Code, which is really cool too.
Yeah.
It's what's interesting about Anti-Gravity. Well, first off, you can tell it's just launched, recently, because it's kind of bare bones in the richness of what some of the other coding agents have. Like, for instance, they don't support ACP yet. I think they had just recently added MCP not too long ago. I could be wrong on that. But I saw some articles that told me that MCP wasn't in anti-gravity yet, and then I found others that said it was. So that led me to believe that it maybe at some point didn't have MCP. It's built around the idea of like an agent manager at its core, right? The others are kind of built around a CLI, and people might say, well, what do you mean by built around an agent manager versus built around the CLI? Well, I guess the best way to kind of understand what I'm talking about is the ones that are kind of built around the CLI are kind of like synchronously session based. Like once multi-agents came out and sub-agents, and once the realization of, like the product, because remember in the beginning, it was like, you'd half the time end up with something usable and half the time end up with a branch that you would abandon because it would be just so much garbage. But somewhere along the months and months and months of using them, they've gotten to the point where pretty much every single thing they produce is usable. And if it's not, you can probably do an extra couple of prompts and clean it up. And it consolidates. It goes in the direction of something nice the longer you prompt it. Now, once again, I'm not talking about like using up all your context and context bleed and all that type of stuff. I'm just saying that it used to be that the longer you built a project with AI way in the beginning, like I'm talking about Cursor and like Anthropic, like Sonnet 1.7 or whatever it was, 3 point something.
Yeah.
It would, it was much worse, way worse, right? You could see the glimpse of the niceness of it, but it was way, way worse. Now with Opus and others, it's AI coding is so solid that like, it's very rare. I can't even remember the last time that I've abandoned a branch because I was just like, it's better to start over. Mm-hmm. With that being said, now that it's like that, the agents that had gone through that time period start to seem kind of a little single threaded, right? Like I end up having like 10 different VS codes open, or now I'm using CMux because I can get kind of that UI that I like through CMux where you can have multiple sessions open in one pane of glass. Mm-hmm. Well, what's nice about anti-gravity is it's built kind of with that in mind. And I know like Claude has done the Claude AI web, and Codex kind of has something similar, and that gives you the multi things. But like, for folks that aren't doing the cloud development and they're doing it on their own machine, they're forced in the direction of CMux or some other bespoke thing that helps orchestrate all your Claude code sessions across all your work trees, etc.
Yeah.
Anti-gravity seems to have that sort of thought about from the beginning. So they have this agent manager view, and the idea is you're creating workspaces. So a workspace might be like a new project you want to work on. So you create a new workspace, right? And then in that workspace, you can spawn multiple, I guess I'd call them threads. Mm-hmm. And each thread can have a completely different conversation about and have it be doing something or studying something in that code base. Now, they don't handle work trees yet. So, like I said, they're new. So you're kind of left on your own to make sure that each of these threads is using a different branch or whatnot, which is kind of annoying. But you could see how they could add work tree support into that in some nice way. I'd really much rather press a plus sign and get a new work tree and then be off and running than to have to, do whatever I'm doing currently. Now, I have a decent skill set up with Claude Code, so I can just tell it to create me a new work tree off of this ticket, and it handles it all behind the scenes. It even orchestrates it in CMux for me. But, I would much rather have a deterministic way of doing all that stuff than to have to rely on the probabilisticness of Claude Code. Although sometimes the probabilistic of it gets me out of some weird edge cases sometimes. So maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So it handles multi-agent, it has got browser automation out of the box because they've got Chrome.
Before we go on, I have to ask you this question because it'll
Yeah.
help me better listen to what you're saying. Does anti-gravity, and excuse me because I didn't really know much about windsurf, are you locked into using Gemini? Are you able to use like any model you want? Like, can you use your Claude Code Max subscription with it?
You cannot use your Claude Code Max subscription with it. And even if you could figure out a way, you'll probably end up getting banned, because that's definitely not something. Open code.
I hope we get to talk about this next episode about the agent SDK, and I know we've talked about it before, but that it's news that you're allowed to use your Claude Code Max subscription with other tools.
Yeah. Well, let's set that aside for a second. We'll talk about it right after anti-gravity, because that's a little bit different, right? Yeah. They'll never let you use Claude Code Max in another competitor to Claude Code, meaning an IDE, like anti-gravity, etc. You can use Claude models inside of anti-gravity, but they have to be API keys.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure if it's all models are in anti-gravity. I didn't really check. I was just kind of going with Gemini because yeah, it's probably the big players. And I didn't try them, honestly. But I've heard they're all free because they're in their sort of like grand opening, their preview of anti-gravity. So all the models are free right now. I didn't have to pay anything to even evaluate or do anything. And I did a lot of work. So they seem to be not even really capped much. So you can use them all for free, which after I heard that I could use them all for free, I was like, man, I should have tried out Opus on it. But I was just using Gemini Pro. And what I can tell you is that once again, it's in the ballpark of Claude Code. Like, so is Codex. It's like you can tell that these things are commoditizing a little bit in the sense that they're all capable of doing the job. Like, if I had to stop using Claude Code, now I'm not as afraid of having to pick up Codex or anti-gravity because I can see that they are capable of getting the job done. Now, is there going to be probably some like little things that I run into, like it doesn't support this yet, or it has this bug in it? Sure. But I imagine that those things will be quickly resolved as they were when Claude Code had those bugs or those.
I don't think we've ever talked about the Gemini CLI, have we? We've talked about so many things. Not that I suggest we should, but I'm just curious, when you said that, I'm like, have you actually tried to use Gemini models to code before? Or was this like you're also using anti-gravity and also seeing Gemini code for the first time?
I have used Gemini when Gemini 3 Pro first came out and everyone was talking about how great it was. I did use it for a while in Cursor just to see. Gotcha. And then I quickly realized it's not as good as Claude, and or Cursor is just not doing a great job. I didn't know which one it was, but I knew ahead of time I wasn't really happy with Cursor at that period of time. That's why I jumped to Claude Code. So I just jumped back real quick to try out Gemini, but it wasn't like doing better than my Opus and Claude Code. So I, said, okay, seems like a good model, but I'm not going to use Cursor. But it did a good job inside of anti-gravity. Now, what I will tell you is anti-gravity has these things called artifacts, right? And I actually have walkthrough outside of artifacts, but it actually is an artifact. So walkthrough is one type of artifact. I don't know why it's called walkthrough, but it's the like, when you tell Claude Code to do a bunch of work and then when it's done and it stops, it gives you this nice synopsis of what it did at the end. I know it by its like raw JSON behind the scenes. It's called like the reason is stop, right? Or I think it's stop reason or something like that. Well,
And how do you know about that? Is that because of the Corvail stuff, like the proxy you're like inspecting? Like, how are you?
yeah, I mean, it's because of AI gateways where I can inspect the traffic.
Mhm.
I also just happened to know about it because I was doing LangGraph stuff at some point, and I realized that that comes back. Even LangGraph uses a stop reason of some sort. Um, so, but anti-gravity treats a lot of these things that in Claude Code are just kind of like the last message,
Mhm.
or the plan is an MD file somewhere, um, or its knowledge is just putting it into this thing called memory somewhere. Um, Anti-gravity treats them as what they call artifacts.
Mhm.
Um, so when you tell it to build a plan, first, one thing I really like about it is when you tell it to build a plan, it's not like Claude Code where it's like laser focused on that plan. And if you build another plan, it kind of like just throws that away. I know it's in your plan folder somewhere, but
Mhm.
it's like kind of always laser focused on one plan. Whereas anti-gravity, a plan is like an artifact that you can open up in a tab. So it's like you can have multiple plans open, and it's not just a markdown file. It's like a special UI where you have buttons that can say make adjustment to plan or execute plan and things like that.
Interesting.
So it's got a deep not it's got a deep sort of integration with these artifact concepts. So artifacts are like a walkthrough. So when it finishes something, that's an artifact. Um,
I
when you build a plan, it's an artifact.
wonder what
When
the
you
I wonder what the lifetime is on like, I don't know, just a random thought. Like, what is the lifetime on like GUIs in like an operating system, like versus like going back to like a dumb terminal type approach, or like, I don't want to say like web pages because like I also don't think that's the way forward. Like, but yeah, I just wonder. Like, I know that Claude Code has a lot of that like wizard type stuff that they do now, and I just wonder. Like, I think it's cool what you're talking about. I don't know. It's more of like a philosophical discussion about the
To
future
me,
of.
Claude Code alone,
Mhm.
I would love to just be in the terminal because it's much more portable. Like my life would be a lot easier if I could just get my job done with the terminal.
Mhm.
But the reason why the IDE still exists for me is um, I want to be able to view the diffs so that I can review the code. Um, what I notice is that when I don't use an IDE and I just use like a GitHub action or um,
Well, what about
you know,
just CMUX? Like, say you're just using CMUX and you don't open
yeah,
VS Code at all.
I
Like,
find
what?
myself even in CMUX, I do at some point I will do exclamation point to go to bash inside of Claude Code, and I'll do code space dot and open up Claude Code with that work tree, because I want to just look at the Git tab and see the diffs,
Mhm.
right? And to me, I have not been able to get away from that.
Mhm.
I get closer and closer to getting away from it every new sort of evolution that comes out,
Mhm.
but I haven't been able to fully get away from it. Now, one thing I have thought about is, well, geez, I'm getting closer and closer to the point where I could just look at the diff inside of the
The terminal
PR or the MR. You
or
know what
the
I mean?
terminal. There's tools that let you see diffs in the terminal.
I know, but like I'm not one of those. I'm not one of those people that like,
Look at diffs in terminals.
yeah, like I'm not.
I'm not one of those guys.
Yeah, I'm not naming a child after Vim or something. But
Oh, you should
so
check out Git GUI. It's pretty cool. I use
yeah,
it.
I have thought about that. I have thought about like, can I replace the IDE with just a nice diff util that pops
Yeah.
up? It's
Yeah.
possible. Um,
Anyway, yeah, sorry. I've taken us down a huge tangent right
a
now.
rabbit hole.
Huge rabbit hole.
Um, but but yeah, the artifacts. So other artifacts that they have are browser records. So for instance, when you have it go and do browser stuff, like I absolutely love Playwright CLI. When I loved Playwright MCP too, but when I got rid of Playwright MCP and put Playwright CLI in, there's also a Context 7 CLI, which I'm like, oh, geez, I should get that. A lot of these MCP servers out there are churning over to CLI plus skill MDs for Claude Code, and for others that are doing, for other coding agents that recognize that.
On that, like, how does a cloud-based like interface make tool calls, whereas it would be able to typically use MCP? Like if you're getting rid of MCP and, like, for example, like System X talks to our CRM, you can communicate it over MCP. Say we build a CLI that under the hood talks to an API.
Yeah.
How does that web interface, chatbot, or whatever tool, like I know for Claude Code, it's super easy. It just says, make this call, whatever. It has documentation.
Yeah. If you have like Open Web UI or something like that, you're probably still going to have to use MCP because it doesn't have like a CLI way of installing. So it's mostly a Claude Code or a coding agent. When people say CLIs are better than MCP, a lot of time what they're really saying is if you're using a coding agent, it's better to have CLIs than MCP. If you have like a chatbot, then hypothetically it would still be better with the CLI than MCP. But it's not as clear cut, right? It has more to do with how coding agents work than it does with the innards of MCP.
I feel like there might be a new standard that comes out, which is like, how do you like build a CLI that's properly sandboxed, and also how do you authenticate with it, like a universal way to get an API key? Because at the end of the day, these CLIs are just making API calls under the hood. So they're using open, there's probably like a standard that can be developed, because I can see why, naming conflicts and, tool sprawl, and like, yeah, I can see why it might be preferable to have a CLI over MCP calls. But yeah, there's still a gap there in terms of like, you can't really kill MCP off right now.
Yeah. So I dragged this down the rabbit hole, and then you dragged me further down it. So anyway, the reason why I was talking about Playwright is because I love Playwright, because I have Claude Code or other coding agents do like smoke tests for me. Like if I code something and there's a UI element to it, I don't write like Playwright tests, which by the way are very slow and take forever. And you end up having to have silly things in there like, did the page say this text on it? Like, oh, wow, great test. And then you have to change them every 5 seconds when you change like the text on the pages.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably someone out there who's saying you're using it wrong, which is probably true. But anyway, what I do is I just tell Claude Code, hey, or the coding agent, I just tell it, hey, based on our branch and what we've built, bring up this with Docker Compose or whatever, bring it up locally and have at it with Playwright. Go click around and use it and tell me what's not working. Like make sure that you go through as a user all the different features we've added, and it finds things. Like it finds a lot of things, I mean, it's not a replacement for a person going through and doing due diligence or a code review, et cetera, or your actual users are still going to find other things perhaps, but it does validate the happy paths and some of the edge cases very well, which is nice.
Yeah.
So anyway, anti-gravity has that out of the box. You don't even need Playwright because it already knows how to manipulate Chrome. One of the benefits of being Google. And what's cool is that when you have it manipulate Chrome and do stuff, it actually records the session. So you can view the session back as like a video or whatever afterwards. And that recording is an artifact. Also knowledge, like persistent memory is an artifact. So if it remembers things across sessions, that's also an artifact they have. So pretty cool. Like I said, workspaces, you want to do a new project would be a new workspace. And then, maybe you want a couple of branches on it to do different things at the same time. Those would be little threads in that workspace. They have this thing called playgrounds, which is kind of like a workspace that's ephemeral. So if you just want to like play around and do a project, but at the end, you probably want to delete it. Playground is what you'd start with. And then you can sort of promote it to a workspace if you want to keep it. There's also, the last thing I'll talk about is there's this thing called inbox. So now that you have all these agents in one single pane of glass, you're seeing all your projects, all your threads, really nice. You're not going to need another anti-gravity open,
right.
Unless you really want to. No matter how many projects you're working on or how many tickets you're working on concurrently, you would have one anti-gravity open. There's this inbox view. And this is kind of where the walkthrough artifacts or other artifacts come into play. So with Claude Code, if you have multiple VS Codes open or multiple terminal windows, maybe you got alarms going. One of the terminal windows needs you to give permission to do something, or it's done and it has a synopsis for you. You're probably going to get a ding. One of those terminal windows is blinking, or in CMux, one of them gets a little icon on it or turns blue or whatever you have your setup.
Yeah.
In anti-gravity, you have a thread, kind of like a Twitter thread, and your agents from all your different windows are like sending posts to you, and they're saying, hey, I just did this. Hey, I need permission to do this. And you're just like,
that's cool. I like that.
Yeah. So I was like, that's pretty cool. I like that.
It made me just think of something that rabbit hole.
Here we go.
Think about this. Think about all of the things. Right now, the inbox is email, but think about in a world where you are orchestrating everything with agents, not just code, but research or task delegation. Think of that universal inbox of everything where you're further and further abstracted away from the code. I'm future tripping a little bit in a good way, but just thinking about a more unified control plane for everything. And there's a lot of discussion about the control plane, instead of agents being orchestrated through prompts or orchestrated through tasks, ticketing systems or things like that. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, for sure. And I do something similar with OpenClaw. I have the ability to chat with my OpenClaw via Telegram, or I can call in it via Twilio. But I also have a board that it checks in periodically, and where tasks are not necessarily, I need to know right now what's going on. I'm orchestrating agents asynchronously, and I get a webhook message when it's done, and then I can check to see what it did, and I can refine it.
Yeah, so it's
but I like the aspect of treating it like it's like a person and it's like a social media post. That's a cool way to spin it.
Yeah, it's nice to have kind of one scrollable list of, latest thing at the top, and then actionable items on them, so you don't have to click into them. You could just accept the permission on it.
I wonder if there's something there about a social media platform for orchestrating your agents, to flip it on its head, where you have the agents check in with you and make posts about what they found, and then you could comment on the thread, they're tweeting almost. I'm thinking
you remind me of what I see 9 different versions of a day. If I see one more Twitter post or one more LinkedIn post of somebody with I built this office where the workers walk around. Look, they're at the water cooler.
Oh, really? Somebody came up with this idea already? It's not unique.
People buy these, people build, apparently the most awesome thing to vibe code, or the first idea that a lot of people got to vibe code on top of Claude Code, or on top of multi-agent, multiple Claude Code sessions, or OpenClaw, is a user interface that looks like The Sims, in the office.
Oh, you got to send me this because
And they all walk around and talk. Look,
I like
I
this.
told them to do something, and they're all walking towards their desks, and then they sit down and they go like this.
Oh yeah, send this to me, please. All right,
There's like so many of them. Like AI is crazy because even if you make something as goofy as that, you still have 9 competitors.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. But I always think to myself, wow, that's a textbook example of like, building something without product market fit, because I'm not sure who's asking. But it's funny. Yeah, I'll send it to you. I'll send them. They're pretty cool though.
Yeah. So before we close out, I mean, we didn't get to the whole agenda, but just some like highlights. I didn't really touch on this before, but apparently another announcement that was made yesterday at GTC was that NVIDIA is actually going to be having specialized chips inside. They're getting in the consumer laptop market, and they're going to be embedding their inference chips inside of laptops. So if you can imagine, like, I don't know if you're tracking this, but like there's a supply chain shortage on Mac Minis.
Yeah.
Because everybody went out and was like wanted to install Blue Bubbles, which I haven't wired up yet, but they wanted to be able to use Blue Bubbles, which is like a service that lets you use iMessage.
I was going to say
that people were like creating clusters of OpenClaw instances to be able to like get access to Blue Bubbles to be able to text people and like do all kinds of interesting things with marketing, because there's like a statistic around Blue Bubble text messages get higher response rates like than emails or Green Bubble text messages. It was literally for that, and you can't use iMessage outside of Mac OS. So people were like, and then the other thing I think was people were trying to save money on token costs by using local models, so like Quen or Llama. So they aren't talking about doing this with Apple, but they're talking about doing it with Lenovo, Dell, and MediaTek. But I suspect Apple is going to jump on this as well, and that they're going to come out with their own ARM inference chip, so that, yeah, because like think about the gold rush of like how much money they made in like Q1 so far selling Mac Minis at like $600 a pop, like the baseline Mac Mini.
Yeah, that's what kind of, I guess OpenClaw kind of blew that up, where all of a sudden everyone's buying the Mac Mini so that they can have their own instance of OpenClaw running. And I think that kind of clued in everyone in the market, like NVIDIA, et cetera, that like, wow, having strong inference on these devices is going to be very powerful. I mean, in the case of OpenClaw, you don't really need strong inference, but
well, if you're trying to
eventually these open source models are going to be good enough. You're going to need a machine that can run them locally.
Like you can offload, like not everything needs to go and use Opus 4.6. I think we're entering an age of like selective usage and optimization of models. So you need you need the ability for like OpenClaw to dynamically adjust where it can save money. So you need that like sort of like gateway intelligence that says, hey, you're over optimizing, these queries can be offloaded, like you're burning token, like especially if it gets commoditized, especially if it's treated like electricity, you're going to like get into like markets where people are going to help you optimize your usage. So like certainly like the very powerful models that are doing like coding, like thinking, or like, something like Rock Heavy, you won't be able to get away from that, but you'll be very able to say, okay, my local model was able to make a determination that I have to farm this out to this model, or like this like simple heartbeat check doesn't need to be like an Opus call.
This is not a hot dog.
Yeah, exactly. Hot dog, not hot dog.
No, I agree with you though. I just, hats off to everyone who's going to the local models, because that's a whole different landscape. It's a whole different world. And it's like something that I just haven't been able to dig into a lot myself because I'm so reliant on the latest and greatest model. And then also what the companies who have done the sort of hyperscalers have done is they've subsidized these things to the point where it's like you can almost have unlimited of the best model for a relatively reasonable price. So if that ends, which I don't think it will in the foreseeable future, and or when they commoditize to the point where the open models are just as good as the best models, clearly it's going to be open source all day. It's going to be open, it's going to be the local models. I think that's the future. That's where it's all going to be, is locally on your device, and nothing's going to leave your device, except for maybe like the craziest of queries or something like that. But even the crazy stuff will end up on your device one day. I think, I feel like this is kind of like similar to the trends we've gone through so many times. Like when I was doing mobile development back in the beginning, it was like you had flash memory. If you ran out of battery, your whole hard drive was deleted, and you had to optimize for the CPU that was on it, which was horrible. And now you don't even need to optimize anymore. You could put a bunch of crap on the iPhone. It still runs great.
Yeah, I had a call with somebody earlier today, and we were just talking about, data centers in space and stuff like that. And he said it's a great time to be alive. And I said, yeah, it is, for sure. But we didn't get to everything. We didn't get to Nemo Clock. We can certainly talk about that next week, or the Killam chain. As usual, we always have more to talk about than we have time.
Now, the question that we'll have to answer is Disney going to make them change their name? Little Nemo Claw.
Oh, God. I mean, at this point, yeah, probably. All right. Thanks for joining, everybody. See you next week.